The silence here is absolute, broken only by the buzzing of the flies that have already found the feast. The clay under his feet is no longer mud. It is a thick mixture of dust and blood that begins to dry under Lehi's merciless sun. There is no music of victory, just the metallic sound of wind hitting fallen shields and the iron smell of death that fills the air. In the center of this valley of corpses, a man breathes heavily, his broad shoulders rising and falling like an exhausted beast. His hands are covered in a dark crust of earth and fluids, and between his fingers he squeezes tightly the only piece of bone that remained intact after the impact against 1,000 skulls. He doesn't look at what he's done. He just stands there, a gigantic, shadowy silhouette against the horizon, as sweat wipes white trails in the soot from his face. You're not seeing the miracle of a hero. You're witnessing the anatomy of a massacre. What the Bible has always told us in soft words. The floor of this valley screams with unbearable rawness. Samson, the massacre that history could not hide. To understand the man at the center of this valley, one must forget the colorful paintings and legends of heroism that time has romanticized. What we have here is an individual who was born under the weight of a promise he never asked to carry. A Nazirite who was supposed to be the symbol of the liberation of an oppressed people, but who became their biggest nightmare. He walks between the borders of Israel and the Philistine cities like a force of nature without a compass, a giant whose long, tangled hair is the only visible sign of a sacred covenant that he profanes with every outburst of temper. Samson is not a trained soldier, does not wear armor, and does not follow war tactics. He operates in a state of pure instinctive fury, transforming any ordinary object into a tool of extermination. He is, at the same time, the expected savior and the feared monster, someone who has the strength to tear down the gates of entire cities, but who cannot hold his tongue in the face of a pretty face or a cheap provocation. Looking at him now, exhausted and stained by violence, causes us deep discomfort because we recognize in him human frailty taken to the extreme. He feels hunger, he feels desire, he feels the bitter taste of betrayal, and above all, he feels a loneliness that no physical force can fill. We are looking at a man who was chosen to be a god among mortals, but who chose to live and kill as the most wounded of men. He is not just a character from an ancient text. He is the record of how far limitless power can take a tormented soul. What you're about to see isn't the toned-down version that time has tried to sell us. In the next few minutes, we will peel back the layers of myth to expose the real anatomy of a tragedy involving absolute power, betrayal, and the isolation of a man who became a living weapon. We will investigate what happened in the shadows of temples and on battlefields where diplomacy gave way to blood, revealing details that were hidden under the weight of convenient translations. There is a blunt truth about Samson that many prefer not to face. A truth that shows that his true enemy was never outside Israel's borders, but rather within his own skin. If you want to understand what really happened that night when the marble collapsed and the silence became eternal, stay with me until the end. It's a dark journey, I know, but it's the only way we can see the man behind the monster. And if you feel like this kind of deeper investigation makes sense for you, Take the opportunity now to join us at this analysis table. Your presence here helps keep this search for what is real and visceral in history alive. Let's move on, because the blood trail is still fresh. The wind that blows over the hills of Judah does not bring coolness. He carries the weight of a secret that the earth tried to bury, but that the blood insists on revealing. To understand Samson's trajectory, we must first learn to read the signs left in the clay and stone. Imagine that we are walking through a scenario of absolute desolation, where the sunlight, once a symbol of divinity, now only serves to accelerate the decomposition of what remains. The environment is saturated with a silence that bothers the ears. It is the silence that follows the chaos, that sound vacuum where the screams of 1,000 men were suddenly silenced by a dry and repetitive impact. There is no glory here. There is only the trace of a force that operated outside of any known military logic. The late afternoon light casts long, distorted shadows across the Lehigh Valley, making the scattered bodies appear part of the rugged geography itself. Every step we take makes the gravel crunch, a sound that echoes like a reminder that life there has been crushed. The smell is the first thing that hits us a metallic mixture of fresh blood with the acrid odor of the sweat of someone who fought desperately for their lives. But most of all, there's the smell of exhaust. In the center of this amphitheater of horror, we find the main character of our reconstruction. He is not standing with his chest puffed out. He is hunched over, hands resting on his knees, head bowed. Sweat drips from her tangled braids, wiping little grooves in the gray dust that covers her skin. Next to him, thrown like a piece of trash, is the jawbone of a dead animal. A piece of white bone, now stained a dark, slimy red, that served as a hammer for the fate of a legion. We watch this scene like investigators who arrive too late to prevent the tragedy, but in time to document its rawness. We look into the faces of the dead and see the terror frozen in their sockets. They were not killed by an elegant sword or a precise arrow. They were massacred by brute, irregular, and purely human force. The tension in the air is almost tactile. It's the static electricity of a disaster that hasn't finished happening yet. Samson breathes, and each deep breath seems to suck out what little oxygen is left in the valley. He is a gun that has just been fired and is still warm to the touch. Our investigation seeks not just to count the bodies, but to understand the mind behind the massacre. What leads a man chosen by the divine to become the executioner of 1,000 souls in a single afternoon? Why was the force that was supposed to build a nation used to pave a valley with corpses? The answers are not in the hymns of victory, but in the details that official history chose to ignore. They are in the texture of the rope that trapped him, in the taste of the honey that corrupted him, and in the darkness that began to grow inside him long before his eyes were gouged out. At this moment, the reconstruction of the facts takes us back, away from this bloody valley, towards the beginning of it all. We need to go back to the point where fury was sown, before it became this harvest of death. The dust is settling, but the mystery is just beginning to dissipate. Let's look closely at the first signs, at the first cracks in the character of this giant. The trail leads us to an isolated vineyard, where the first roar was silenced. The investigation is open. The first block of evidence is before us. The reconstruction of a tragedy rarely begins at its climax. It hides in the isolated incidents that everyone ignored. To understand the monster we saw in the valley, we need to go back to the vineyards of Timnah. The scenario here changes drastically. We leave the open battlefield and enter an environment of dense shadows, dense foliage, and a humid heat that makes the skin itch. Samson walks alone. He has become estranged from his parents, a decision that reveals his early inclination toward isolation and secrecy. The sound here is that of dry grass crunching under leather sandals and the constant buzz of insects that seem to predict violence. Suddenly, the air freezes. The sound that emerges from the vegetation is not that of an ordinary animal. It's a roar that vibrates in the rib cage, a warning of imminent death. A young, hungry lion leaps out of the shadows. Any ordinary man would have cold blood in his veins, but investigation of the facts shows us a different reaction in Samson. There was no search for a weapon. There was no call for help. What happened there was the sudden awakening of a force that did not belong to the world of men. Imagine the sound of tendons stretching, the dry crack of feline bones being forced beyond their biological limit. Samson didn't just kill the animal, he tore him to pieces. The hands that should have carried symbols of peace were, for the first time, dipped in hot blood and viscera. The silence that followed the interrupted roar was the birth of a new awareness that he was, in essence, a weapon of mass destruction without a safety catch. But the most disturbing detail of this reconstruction is not the fight, but what comes after. Time passes. The lion's carcass is left behind, rotting in the sun, becoming a feast for time and earth. Days later, when retracing his path, Samson stops in front of the remains. The environment now exudes the acrid odor of decomposition, a smell that would drive away anyone with the slightest sense of preservation. However, he approaches. Inside the overturned carcass, a swarm of bees had built their hive. Honey dripped between the dead animal's exposed ribs. Here, the investigator observes the human decision that seals fate. Samson is a Nazirite, a man under a vow that forbids any contact with death. The lion's corpse is the ultimate representation of impurity, but his will ignores the sacred. We see his large hands plunge into the animal's chest cavity, fingers closing over the sticky honeycombs. He removes honey from rot. The sound is that of this liquid I sow dripping onto the carrion. He eats. The sensorial contrast is absolute. The extreme sweetness of the honey mixed with the fetid smell of the carcass. By taking that food to his mouth, Samson is not just satisfying his hunger, he is devouring his own integrity. He discovers that he can break the most fundamental rules and that apparently nothing happens. The power he carries gives him a dangerous feeling of impunity. He walks back to his parents, offering them the honey, but keeping the origin a secret. The silence about what happened in the vineyard is the first stone in the wall of isolation that he builds around himself. He knows what he did. He knows the sweetness he shares came from a place of death. The investigation shows us that, for Samson, the border between what is life and what is destruction began to erase there. He no longer sees the danger in his strength. He sees it as a tool for personal satisfaction. The gun is now cocked. He discovered that he can kill and that he can defile without immediate remorse. The tension in this phase of reconstruction is latent, like a volcano that begins to heat the ground before the first lava eruption. Samson now walks with a heavy secret on his chest and lethal confidence in his hands. He believes he has control, but what he still doesn't realize is that the fury he awakened in the lion now dwells within him, waiting for just one reason: for a spark of frustration to turn into a fire. The honey he consumed on the carcass left a lingering taste, a sweetness that masks the smell of blood that will never leave his hands again. The problem with those who discover they can do anything is that sooner or later, that everything demands a price, and the first payment on that blood bill wouldn't be long in coming. The fury that was born in an isolated vineyard was about to be exported to the streets of an inhabited city. The gun was loaded, the secret was kept, and the fuse of the first big explosion had just been lit at a wedding banquet where the words would carry the weight of death sentences. The trail of destruction was just beginning to lead out of the bush and into civilization. And the next step of this investigation takes us directly to the cobblestone streets of Ashkelon, where one man's debt would be paid with the lives of 30 innocents. The investigation moves from the silent vineyards to the noisy and oppressive environment of a wedding banquet. The scene in Timnah is filled with false joy. The sound of forced laughter and the clinking of glasses hide a political tension that is about to boil over. Samson, driven by an arrogance fueled by his secret, poses a riddle to his Philistine guests, betting 30 changes of fine clothes. This is not a joke between friends, but a power game where pride is the real currency. When betrayal happens and Honey's secret is ripped from his bride through death threats, what we see is not a man hurt in his feelings, but a beast whose safety locks have been ripped off. The focus of our reconstruction now moves 20 miles south, toward the walls of Ashkelon. The mood changes from a failed party to that of an urban noir thriller. Imagine the dark, narrow streets of a coastal town, lit only by flickering torches that cast distorted shadows on the stone walls. The sound here is that of heavy, purposeful footsteps echoing in the alley. Samson did not come to negotiate. He came to collect a debt that the world, in his view, owed him. The investigation of the facts takes us to an isolated alley where 30 men, probably ordinary citizens or guards in their moment of rest, are surprised by a force that defies human anatomy. The sensorial reconstruction of that moment is brutal. There was no honorable duel. What the records suggest is a silent and efficient slaughter. Hear the sharp crack of necks being broken and the dull impact of bodies hitting the dirt floor before they can even scream. Samson operates with surgical coolness. He doesn't use swords, he uses his hands. Every strike is a verdict. The salty smell of Ashkelon's coast is suddenly drowned out by the iron odor of blood that begins to flow between the cobblestones. 30 lives are snuffed out in minutes, not for a noble cause, but so that one man could keep his word on a gambling bet. The most disturbing detail for the investigator is what happens after the massacre. Samson does not run away in panic. He bends over the still warm corpses and begins to strip them. The sound of fabric being ripped and robes being torn from inert bodies is the sound of complete dehumanization. He piles up the bloody clothes, makes a bundle, and walks back to Timnah. He hands over the payment for the bet, clothes that still carry the heat and smell of dead men, and leaves the place with an indifference that chills the blood of those who observe. In this block, you notice we know that the genesis of fury gave way to the execution of cruelty. Samson crossed a line of no return. He discovered that his strength could be used to solve trivial problems through extermination. He does not kill to free his people. He kills to satisfy his wounded ego. The 30 families in Ashkelon who awoke to find their dead are silent testimony that this man recognizes no geographical or moral boundaries. The weapon now knows it is effective, and the world begins to understand that no one is safe where the giant walks. But revenge is a cycle that feeds on itself. Upon returning home, Samson discovers that his absence and his fury caused him to lose his own wife to someone else. What was a personal conflict is about to become an environmental and economic disaster of catastrophic proportions. The investigation now leaves the alleys of Ashkelon and turns to the fields of golden wheat, where the horizon is about to be painted black by the smoke of a kind of terrorism, the likes of which antiquity has never seen. Samson's short fuse found the powder keg of an entire nation's livelihood. The investigation now leaves the blood-soaked alleys of Ashkelon and moves to the economic heart of the region. The golden wheat fields that stretch as far as the eye can see. The scenery here is of a bucolic beauty that precedes the horror. The sound is that of the wind gently blowing over the ripe ears. A sea of gold ready for harvest that would support thousands of families. But for Samson, this landscape does not represent life, represents the perfect target for a revenge that escalated from individual murders to mass terrorism. Upon discovering that his wife had been handed over to someone else, what we see is not a man in mourning, but a strategist of pain. The reconstruction of this block focuses on the meticulous and disturbing planning of an unprecedented act of animal cruelty. Imagine the scene: dusk falling over the hills, and Samson, with the patience of a predator, capturing 300 foxes. The ambient sound is a mix of desperate whines and the scratching of the leather of the traps. The sensory detail that the investigator cannot ignore is the fearful smell of the animals and the dry sound of the torches being prepared. The execution of the plan is unbearably crude. Samson ties the foxes in pairs, tail to tail, holding a lit torch between them. What follows is choreographed chaos. When released, the foxes, in absolute panic and pulling each other in opposite directions, run desperately into the dry fields. The sound of wheat crackling under fire is like a series of small explosions. Within minutes, the sea of gold turns into a sea of flames. The horizon, once serene, is now a pulsating red line beneath a soot-black sky. The impact was not just visual, it was a sentence of starvation. The investigator notes that the fire not only consumed the harvested wheat, but also the vineyards and olive groves. The smell of burnt bread and hot oil fills the air for miles. Thousands of foxes screaming in agony as they incinerated an entire nation's economy. Samson, from the hills, watches the fire that he himself caused. There is no remorse in her silhouette. There is only the grim satisfaction of one who decided that if he could not have what he wanted, no one else would have anything to eat. This act marks Samson's transition from an alley killer to a war criminal. He didn't attack soldiers. He attacked the livelihoods of civilians, the elderly and children. The investigation shows us that the disproportionality of his actions is his trademark. For a personal insult, he condemns a region to misery. The tension here reaches a feverish pitch as the Philistines, driven to despair by the loss of everything they possessed, respond with equally blind violence, burning Samson's ex-wife and father-in-law alive. The cycle of hate is now out of control. The blood and ashes have mixed in such a way that diplomacy is a dead word. Samson retreats into the crevices of Ethan's rock, hiding like a wild beast that has just devastated a village and now waits for the next move. He knows the army will come. He knows that the trail of smoke he left in the sky is an invitation to the final confrontation. The investigation now prepares us for the most brutal moment in this entire trajectory. The scorched earth scene was just the prelude to a valley that would be paved with bones. The Philistine army is marching. The chains are being readied, and the next block takes us directly into the valley of Lehi, where the sweat of 1,000 men would mix with the dust of the earth under the blow of an improvised lethal weapon. The fury, which began in a vineyard and passed through the flames of the fields, is about to reach its absolute boiling point. The investigation now leads us to a scenario of apparent surrender, which quickly becomes the biggest bloodbath of this reconstruction. The Valley of Lehi is not just one geographic location. It is the stage where physical exhaustion and divine fury meet in a brutal collision. Imagine the scene. 3,000 men of Samson's own people, cowed by the economic and military terror that the giant provoked, descend to arrest him. The predominant sound here is the metallic clink of new chains and the murmur of a people who chose to hand over their savior to save their own skins. Samson, in a gesture of arrogant confidence or perhaps deep boredom with the mediocrity around him, allows himself to be tied up. The ropes tighten his wrists, the thick hemp breaks his skin, but he doesn't react. Yet, the tension reaches breaking point when the Philistines, spotting the prisoner on top of the hill, let out a shout of triumph that echoes off the valley walls. It is the sound of early victory. But for the investigator analyzing the facts, this scream was the final trigger. The sensorial reconstruction of this moment focuses on what happens inside Samson's body. The breathing that becomes a muffled growl, the muscles that expand with supernatural pressure, and the dry sound of the new strings popping as if they were burnt threads of linen. In a second, the prisoner disappears and the weapon reappears. Without a sword at hand, he bends down and grabs the first thing the ground offers him, the jawbone of a donkey that had recently died. The bone is still heavy, moist, and rigid. What follows in the next few minutes or hours defies any record of combat in antiquity. It's not a choreographed battle. It is a massacre of resistance. The sound is that of dull, rhythmic impacts, bone against bronze, bone against skull, bone against flesh. 1,000 men advance and 1,000 men fall. The investigator must note the physical cost of this. Imagine the suffocating heat of the valley, the sweat blinding your eyes, and Samson's arm moving like a tireless piston until the valley changes color. The iron smell of blood saturates the air, mixing with the dust raised by the fighting. In the end, What remains is a pile of corpses and a man so exhausted that his only plea is not for forgiveness, but for water, so he doesn't die of thirst in the middle of the massacre he himself created. But investigation reveals that the height of strength precedes the beginning of moral and psychological decline. The hero of the Valley of Lehi, who single-handedly destroyed an army, becomes easy prey for a strategy that weapons could not defeat: infiltration. We now enter an environment of seduction and espionage in the shadows of Sorek. Delilah is not presented here as a passionate lover, but as an agent of cold intelligence financed by the lords of the Philistines. The sound changes from the impact of bone to the whisper of silk sheets and promises lying next to your ear. We see Samson playing with danger, lying about the origin of his strength, enjoying the psychological game as the siege closes. The environment is perfumed with expensive oils, but the investigator smells betrayal in Delilah's every word. The tension escalates with each failed attempt until the moment when, pressured by constant emotional torture, he reveals the secret of his pact. The silence that night, while he slept on the lap of the person who would sell him, is the most tense moment in the entire narrative. The sound of the scissors cutting his hair, the symbol of his vow, is the sound of his disintegration as a man and as a myth. The result is immediate and visceral. The giant who tore lions and armies to pieces is subdued like a child. The reconstruction focuses on the horror of the mutilation, the glow of the blades heated in the fire, and the scream of absolute pain as her eyes are gouged out. The darkness is now definitive. Samson is taken to Gaza, no longer as a warrior, but as a beast of burden, chained to a stone mill in an underground prison. The constant, monotonous sound of the stone turning over the grain is the soundtrack to his humiliation. He, who burned fields of wheat, is now a slave to the production of that same wheat, grinding in silence while fury brews in the dark. The investigation now prepares us for the final act. The giant is blind, but his hair, a symbol of his connection with fury, begins to grow again in the silence of the prison. The Philistines, in their arrogance, believe that the threat has been neutralized and prepare a festival of mockery in the temple of their god. They don't know that the prisoner who turns the stone millstone is just waiting for the moment to turn the temple into a cemetery. The next step in our reconstruction takes us to the center of the Temple of Dagon, where the marble is about to meet the limit of its strength. The investigation has now reached its point of no return. The setting shifts from the damp, silent dungeons to the noisy, suffocating opulence of the Temple of Dagon in Gaza. The air is heavy, saturated with the smell of cheap incense, crowd sweat, and the odor of wine overflowing from the glasses of 3,000 spectators. The sound is a cacophony of mocking laughter and voracious chants, stories that echo through the high stone vaults. They celebrated the fall of the giant as if they had tamed nature itself. In the center of this amphitheater of arrogance, the figure that everyone came to see appears: Samson. The sensory reconstruction of this moment focuses on absolute contrast. The giant is no longer the fiery warrior of the Valley of Lehi. He is a carcass of a man, dragging heavy chains that creak against the polished marble floor. His eye sockets are empty, dark scars hidden under the tangle of hair that silently regain the length lost in prison. He is guided by the hands of a young man, a detail that accentuates his physical vulnerability. The investigator watches the final decision being made in the vacuum of that visual darkness. Samson does not ask to be released. He asks to be led to the central columns that support the colossal weight of the entire structure. The environment is one of invisible architectural tension. The temple, loaded far beyond its capacity by people crowding onto the roof, is at the limit of engineering at the time. Samson places his palms against the cold of the polished stone. The sound around him begins to fade for him, replaced by the quickening pulse of his own blood and the crackle of his muscles contracting one last time. He says a prayer that is not a request for forgiveness, but a contract of extermination. He wants to die as long as everyone there dies with him. The climax of this reconstruction is purely mechanical and visceral. Imagine the sound. First, a barely perceptible creak, the marble screaming under a pressure that defies the laws of physics. Then the sound of deep cracks that shoot up the columns like lightning. Panic is not immediate. It begins as a confused murmur and ends in a collective scream of pure terror as the ceiling begins to give way. Samson pushes with everything that's left of his tormented soul. The columns move, and the Temple of Dagon stops being a place of worship and becomes a stone press. The fall is not clean. It's a cascade of tons of rubble, choking dust, and instantly crushed bodies. The sound is deafening. A boom that could be heard throughout Gaza City, followed by a sudden dead silence. Thousands of lives were erased in a single second of structural collapse. The investigator notes that, in his final act of suicidal terrorism, Samson killed more people than in his entire life as a fighter. He turned his own execution into an unprecedented massacre. What remains beneath the cloud of gray dust that hangs over the ruins is a marble cemetery. There are no winners. Israel's great liberator ends his journey buried by the enemies he swore to destroy, proving that his strength was always a double-edged sword that cut himself deeper than others. The technical investigation ends here, among the rubble and heavy silence of Gaza, revealing that Samson's trajectory was a straight line towards the abyss. All we are left with is a final look at what this mountain of rubble has to tell us about human nature and the weight of a destiny filled with blood. The reconstruction of the facts is complete, but the lessons left under the stones of the Temple of Dagon still echo, demanding a final reflection on the man who preferred collapse to surrender. The lights of the Temple of Dagon went out under tons of marble, and the silence that settled in Gaza is the same that haunts us to this day. In closing this case, we do not find the porcelain hero that children's illustrations promised, but a man of flesh, blood, and catastrophic flaws who carried on his shoulders the weight of a power that he never knew how to tame. Samson's trail is not just made of miracles, but of a fury that incinerated fields, of an ego that cost innocent lives, and of a loneliness that not even the strength of 1,000 men could fill. The image remains of a giant who tore down the columns of the world around him, but who died a prisoner of his own choices long before the ceiling collapsed. In the end, the question that echoes among the rubble is deeper than the myth. To what extent are we masters of our strength, or just slaves to our own desires? Perhaps the real massacre did not occur in that valley or in the temple, but within a soul that had everything it took to free a nation, but could not free itself. Today's investigation ends here, but the details of this story remain alive in each of us. If this dive into Samson's rawness brought any light to you, or if it just left you with more questions, write the word columns in the comments. It's our discreet way of finding out who stayed until the end, observing the ruins up close. If you feel that this channel is the place where you want to continue seeking the unfiltered truth, consider joining us by subscribing and following the next cases we open. And if you know someone who, if you are not afraid to face the shadows of history, share this video. The blood trail still has a lot to teach us. Until the next case.